What's up everyone, Vu of Envo Films back with another video, and you know what today is. Sony released a new camera today, and of course, because I'm a Sony fanboy douchebag and my YouTube channel in general is talking about cameras, I'm going to talk about the Sony ZV-E1 aka baby A7S3 with more cheap Chinese recycled plastic over the body instead of whatever other Chinese metal that they're using for the A7S3, FX3, FX30, etc. And I know all 6 of you are probably wondering if I'm going to buy the ZV-E1. And yes, I'm going to buy the ZV-E1. Not just because I'm a Sony fanboy D-bag, but it's because that I am kind of a vlogger. You call this a vlog here, but obviously I am doing a video in my studio using FX3. Well, it's not even a studio, it's my office, but I do have another channel. I have a fishing channel where I go around fishing for fish, obviously. Most of the time, I'm not catching anything because I am more of a trash fisherman than I am a trash cameraman. So there's that. But the reality is the ZV-E1 ticks a lot of boxes for me. And the main box is obviously the size and weight. Yes, I can use my FX30, but I can only imagine how small and light the ZV-E1 is. On top of that, it is a Sony A7S3 sensor, which means it's full frame and it has that 12,800 second base ISO that will allow me to get a lot better, higher quality image when I'm filming my fishing adventures in the morning, which I do a lot and it's quite dark, and it'll be very valuable to have that 12,800 ISO. But I think the most important thing for me is the lightness. I don't have to carry something as bulky as this, even though this is small too, but that ZV-E1 is very tiny. Those of you who subscribe to my channel know that I value small, compact gear because largely, not the proper word, but I have been carrying around small, compact gear my whole life below the belt because, as you can see, I'm Asian. But of course, quality not quantity. I have 2 kids, a beautiful wife, so there you have it. Again, the ZV-E1 is basically a Sony A7S3 FX3 with a smaller, lighter, cheaper body. Yeah, it has slightly better autofocus apparently than the A7R5. It has a bunch of new AI features, all this craziness. You could watch any other Tube Doucher video to look at that. My only concern about the camera really is it's overheating, as again, I will probably be filming myself fishing, and I usually would put the camera on at 24p for quite a while. Summers can get pretty hot, so we'll see how long it lasts. But I'm going to assume that once you put some type of small cage on there, it'll help with the heat a little bit, as camera cages do help cameras dissipate some heat. Beyond the camera, its specs and its capabilities, all that stuff, the only one thing I see that is a quote-unquote cripple, or whatever you want to call that, is the 120p is not available. And to me, 120p, the 120p 4K is not available, and to me, 120p 4K is probably because of overheating, because the camera cannot film indefinitely the way an FX3, FX30, or a Sony A7S III can in 4K 60. Pretty much vast majority of tests out there, you can see that the Sony A7S III FX3 could film indefinitely in 4K 60, no problem. The Sony ZV-E1 represents a lot of things that I like about Sony. Sony does not hold back their new tech, their new software, their new innovations with new cameras that they release regardless of like the price range, like the lineup, whatever. What I mean by that is that you could have like a Sony A7R III released several years back, and then a couple months later they had better autofocus system in the A7 III when it's released. Technically the A7 III is a cheaper, lower end camera than the A7R III, but hey, they're a few months later in the advancements of their tech, so they threw in the best tech they had into the new camera. They do that for pretty much every camera that I've seen them release. You know, like they would have the A7S II with really crappy autofocus, and then the A6500, which is the APS-C camera, which is cheaper than the A7S II, but they loaded up with the most updated autofocus. They do the same thing with the ZV-E1. The ZV-E1 has better autofocus than a lot of their higher end cameras that was released before it. So it does not surprise me that Sony put in a lot of new AI tech, a lot of new menu systems, a lot of the new things that they've been working on the past few months after the release of the A7R5, and of course almost 3 years after the release of the Sony A7S III, which is the original OG of that 12 megapixel sensor. So that is the great thing about Sony. They could have just released the ZV-E1 without those AI things, with pretty much the same menu system as the current A7S III, which I'll get to in a bit, and sold it and sell it for the price they're selling it at, which is $2,200 for the body, and people probably buy it anyway. But Sony, again, they had innovated. They had found new ways of doing things the past 2.5 years since the A7S III was released, and they just threw it all into this new camera because this camera is new. There's a lot of AI stuff, and of course these days AI is a big thing, so it all makes sense, right? I love that about Sony. They do not hold back new tech on their new cameras, regardless of like the price level of the camera, regardless if it's consumer, prosumer, or professional camera. Yeah? My problem with Sony right now is a lot of other tube boosters already talked about this. They just haven't been updating their older cameras with firmware. I mean, technically, the Sony A7S III and the FX3 share the same processor. The FX3 got a pretty massive update last year. They got the Cine EI, they got the new menu system, they got the new touchscreen capabilities, and Sony A7S III didn't get any of this stuff. The ZV-E1 has even a newer menu system. It has focused breathing compensation. A lot of people care a lot about that. I don't, but there's a lot of features in the Sony ZV-E1 that the Sony A7S III can't handle through a firmware update. Obviously, there's a lot of things that can't handle, such as probably some of the AI stuff that requires some type of AI chip, whatever. But a lot of those other things, again, focused breathing compensation, the new dynamic stabilization system, all of these new software tweaks could be done on the Sony A7S III through a firmware update, but they haven't. I don't know why they haven't done that. I think it's kind of a disservice to people who bought the camera. FX3, I mean, the ZV-E1 has professional features that most vloggers probably won't even care about, such as LUT display. The FX3, FX30, you could put LUTs in here and display it on the camera to help you film. And you could either bake it into the footage or just have it as, just baked onto a display so you could see what you're filming, and you could have a good idea of what your log footage will look like after you've put it into your computer and graded it, etc. Sony A7S III doesn't have that at all. And the ZV-E1 does. I just think it's ridiculous. The A7S III hasn't gotten at least the current FX3 firmware update. I understand maybe not Cine EI and all that stuff, but at least the menu system, at least LUT display, and flexible ISO or whatever. The same thing with the ZV-E1. It has flexible ISO, but does not do Cine EI, etc., which is fine. That camera, the ZV-E1, is not geared for professionals, right? It is geared for people who vlog, maybe people filming family stuff. There's a lot of different dummy-proof, like beginner-type shit that is in the camera that I would never use. But I could see a lot of people who don't know what the hell they're doing with the camera use that and still get very great footage, from the Sony A7S III sensor. If you're a professional, obviously you're going to want to get FX3, FX6, etc. But it would be great if you had some of those features into your camera through a firmware update, because your camera, it's processor, its sensor is capable of all of those things that the Sony ZV-E1 can do. But going back to the ZV-E1's capabilities, it does not mean you can't use it in a professional setting. I'm pretty confident that most competent filmmakers can take that ZV-E1 and create amazing stuff. I mean, what did we do before the A7S III was out? We were using a 7 III, which didn't even have 10-bit and all that stuff. And now this camera has 10-bit, 4K 60, all that stuff. You could theoretically buy 3 of those cameras and, you know, be a full-fledged wedding filmmaker. You could get a bunch of those cameras, do corporate video work. Overheating is a problem, but obviously if you're indoors, probably not gonna have that problem, especially if you're just doing 24p interviews. So what's the ZV-1 for? I mean, it's a $2,200 body. It's only $400 more expensive than an FX3. You do get a lot more professional features on the FX3, dual card slots and all that stuff. But, you know, if you have an FX3, FX30, you have A7S III ready, and you need an additional body just for a different angle, maybe a backup camera, whatever, maybe like maybe a BTS camera for your social media, for your business, the ZV-E1 seems like a great choice, especially with all those AI tracking and all that stuff. But yeah, but primarily that camera is for vloggers, and I think it's fantastic. I think Sony is doing good things with their innovation. Sony, just start throwing some of that stuff in firmware updates for your other cameras. I don't think it's going to hurt at all. If anything, it's probably hurting you because people aren't buying the Sony A7S III. Instead, a lot of people, there's people ditching. I mean, there's a serious problem because there's some people who are ditching Sony and going, you know, switching to another system because they don't like that Sony's not updating their cameras. I don't have the biggest problem with it. I mean, I understand the Sony A7S III is almost 3 years old. A camera is old. These days with tech, a camera is outdated like 6 months after it's released. I'm not even playing with you. So, but in my opinion, overall, the Sony ZV-E1 is a fantastic little camera, and I look forward to trying it out. I look forward to creating more YouTube videos on it, to get people to click on my affiliate links, to buy the camera, to make myself more money. And then I'll make additional YouTube videos on it, talking about the menu, talking about how I'm going to set it up, talking about what lenses to get for it, to make even more affiliate commission, to line up my bank account. That is my primary goal with that camera. And of course, use it for family videos and fishing. But yeah, with that said, until next time, lighten up.
Hey man, you got the new Sony ZV-E1 camera to review?
No, I didn't get one for review, but it's a nice camera. I think I'm gonna buy one.
Oh my god, that because your YouTube channel is trash?
What do you mean by that?
If you want to be the best, if you want to be professional YouTuber, you need to buy the ZV-E1, make review video, what lens to buy video, how to color grade video. And then you need to sell ZV-E1 lot and call it the Ad Lot Pack.
Not gonna lie, I'm not trying to make content like everyone else. And LUTs, they take a long time to develop properly.
Let me show you. Rack 709 Ad Lot, Dirty Ad Lot, Canon Color Shine Ad Lot, All Night Ad Lot, Transition Ad Lot.
Bro, are you serious right now?
With discount only $29.99.